a book that I picked up at the library that I think is a really good introductory book about Shakespeare the man. So I'm holding this up here. It's by a writer named Bill Bryson, who is probably better known as a travel writer, but he writes about various subjects. And this is about, it's a brief biography about Shakespeare called Shakespeare, the World as Stage. And it's, again, it's a very curt, concise biography, about less than 200 pages. But Bryson really writes very well, and I think he's certainly had access to the most modern scholarship about Shakespeare. And I think it's a really good book to begin if you're just, getting started with reading about Shakespeare. It's, a nice, good place to start one's research. So just wanted to offer that little endorsement.
Thank you.
Thank you. And also, I was told that there's this PBS program that's going to be resuming, I think, on Saturday, July the 11th. It's a comedy program called Upstart Crow.
Oh, it's very funny.
Yeah, for those of you who are not aware of this program, Upstart Crow. First of all, the title is actually comes from a little remark that was made in a book written very early in Shakespeare's career, in which he is derided by a rival playwright as an upstart crow, like that. That this young actor thinks he can write iambic pentameter and write a tragedy, but that he really should leave these things to his betters. And the person who attributes this description of Shakespeare as an upstart crow is a fellow writer of the day named Robert Greene. And I think that's the only reason why people remember Robert Greene, is because his is the first statement that really acknowledged Shakespeare's existence in print. Well, Robert Greene happens to be sort of the villainous character in Upstart Crow, which is a show about Shakespeare and his family and various other people associated with him. And it's a modern day playwright named Ben Elton, who has written this fantasy about what Shakespeare might have been like back in those Elizabethan or Jacobean times. And he creates his own little version of that sort of Elizabethan style English that he uses for the show, but it's done in such a way that it creates jokes that are funny to us 21st century people, not necessarily to Elizabethans. So I think the show has wonderful comments about what it might have been like to be in England during Shakespeare's time, but it also looks at it from a modern culture's point of view as well. I think the more you know about Shakespeare and his works, the funnier the show is. Right. So since we're all really immersing ourselves in his writing, I think that you will find this to be a very amusing program. I believe it's on late at night, maybe about 10:30 on Saturday. And I know that they'll be showing it throughout this month on succeeding Saturday evenings. I definitely heartily endorse your viewing of this program, because I think
it's also on Prime, Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime, okay.
Yeah, all the seasons. And you're right, we've watched it for a number of years, and we keep rewatching it. And the more I know since your class, the funnier it is, and the more poignant it is.
Yeah. And this is the same writer who also wrote the script for the Kenneth Branagh film All Is True, which takes a very serious look at Shakespeare's final years. And as hilarious as Upstart Crow is, it's almost the very opposite with All Is True. It's almost completely diametrically opposed in tone. So I think it's interesting to look at those two products of Elton, both very knowledgeable about about Shakespeare, but you know, taking a totally different tack in each of these projects. So anyway, just thought I'd like to offer that again, a recommendation. So today we're taking a look at a play that the Stratford Festival is billing as The Adventures of Pericles. I think usually when it's published, they simply call it by that person's name, Pericles. And what strikes me unusual about this piece is that it may be one of the last works of Shakespeare that was really fully, you know, given canonic status in his body of work, because you know, so many of Shakespeare's plays were included in this great anthology in 1623, what we call the First Folio. But Pericles was not included in that First Folio, and I don't think it was included either in the second edition of the folio in the 1630s. It only was finally included in what was called the Third Folio from about 1664. I mean, this is you know, maybe close to 50 years after Shakespeare's death. So, you know, a number of people might wonder, is this truly authentic Shakespeare or not? You know, and again, this state of you know, this official publication as a Shakespeare play is very unusual, this, you know, late acknowledgement, because in Shakespeare's lifetime, Pericles was probably one of his most popular plays. And one can tell this because there were all these unacknowledged or sort of not unauthorized versions that were published of Pericles. First in 1609, and that publication in 1609, which is called the First Quarto, that was sort of reprinted pretty much almost exactly the same in the Second Quarto the same year, 1609, and then a third printing, the Third Quarto in 1611, and then after Shakespeare's death, there was a fourth in 1619, a fifth in 1630, and a sixth quarto in 1635. I mean, they don't keep reprinting plays in this time if it wasn't a very popular item. You know, and you know, during the 17th century, when the Puritans took over in England in the mid-century, they pretty much closed down the theaters for you know, about a dozen years or so. And when they finally reopened the theaters for business in the 1660s, supposedly one of the very first productions that was revived was a version of Pericles. So I think that says a lot about how beloved this play was. But you know, I have a feeling that one of the reasons why this piece was so little acknowledged by the real guardians of Shakespeare's reputation, namely the people who put together the First Folio. One of the reasons, I think, is that it is so very much unlike any Shakespeare play that people had seen before up to that point. If this play was originally done, say about 1609, which is when this first quarto was first published, there are no plays of Shakespeare before that really have this kind of feeling or structure to it. So for those of you who have seen this production in this film of Pericles from the Stratford Festival, what about this piece gives it this difference of either style or feeling or content or structure compared with some of the other pieces that we've seen thus far in this Stratford Film Festival. Oh yes, I see Linda's hand up,
Yeah.
yes.
I don't know. When I was watching it, it's the least favorite of the plays that we've read so far. It's for me this summer.
Okay, and what is it? What is it about this piece that when you lay it beside some of the other plays we've seen thus far, what is it lacking what is it that you're missing in this piece that you found in say a King Lear or Macbeth or one of these other pieces?
Anything introspective, there was no depth to it that I could see. It almost seemed like something that somebody commissioned him and said, we got to have a play a week from Saturday night. What can you do for us? Type
Okay.
of thing. It just didn't seem to have any depth or meaning to it. It was, I mean, I know he's written many comedies. It didn't have much, I don't know. I expected, I think maybe it'd have a little more humor. It didn't. I wasn't thrilled
Okay.
with it.
Well, you know what you say about this having no feeling of introspection. That is exactly, I think, what Harold Bloom in Shakespeare: The Invention of the Human says about the piece. Let's see. I don't know if I can find a good, but basically, he says that Shakespeare, in the latter part of his career, really tends to step away from this notion of trying to be this sort of almost like a dramatic psychologist, trying to plumb the depths of the main personalities in his plays. In a play like Hamlet or a play like Macbeth, we really feel in the audience that we know what and how Macbeth is feeling when he goes through all these bloody deeds he does through the play. And Hamlet, we realize what is making him tick throughout the course of that play. And I think in Pericles, we don't always have that feeling of really knowing the interiority of the title character. And I think, again, it's not just in Pericles, but in all the plays that follow that, we get this similar kind of thing, that where he's not necessarily trying to create that full-bodied, three-dimensional creation of personality that he does in his greatest tragedies. Let's see, I think, Jim, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah. I want to give a completely different viewpoint on it.
Okay.
Because I found I thoroughly enjoyed it when I watched it. It may be my one or two top Shakespearean plays from here on.
Mm-hmm.
I'd hardly even heard of it before. And it's an introspection, and what the characters are feeling is very, very important. But the story just completely amazed me. I really thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yes, so this is really a different genre that Shakespeare is involved in Pericles. It's not a pure comedy. It's not a pure tragedy, but it has qualities of both mixed in, and scholars in the 19th century gave this this kind of a piece the description of romance. And again, they're using this word romance in a very different way than I think most of us think of it. We're not talking about something that's a great love story, or at least it could be, but it isn't necessarily that's the prime element. So Marjorie Garber, in her study about Shakespeare after all, she says about this genre of this style in Shakespeare's late works, she says that a romance is a story of adventure, often involving a hero who suffers a disaster and then extreme privation, defeating overwhelming odds to emerge triumphant. And she says that such romances were popular in the Greek Hellenistic period and in medieval and early modern Europe. So in a sense, you could say that Shakespeare is kind of looking back to an older older literary tradition, a tradition that was very popular in the late medieval era, and might even go back to literary traditions in late Greek and Roman literature as well. So I think that it's definitely a different dramatic mode than Shakespeare had explored previous to this, and I think we have to, in a sense, judge it on those terms, in terms of that literary school. Marie, yes.
It was a fairy tale, except for the incest.
Right.
It was imagination.
Yes, we
No,
tend to
was
like our fairy
like
tales
Sleeping
with hold the
Beauty
incest.
and
Hold the incest,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, but yes, yeah, and there are times where Shakespeare does dip into the fairy tale mode. You could very well say that King Lear starts out in a fairy tale like way, with this king, having these 3 daughters that he's going to reward, dividing his kingdom 3 ways to these daughters, and creating a kind of a test for the daughters to show their worth. And it almost has a feeling of like Cinderella and her stepsisters in that play. So there definitely are moments where Shakespeare does indulge in that fairy tale element, but that aspect of myth and folk tale that becomes much greater in these romances. So he dips his foot in the water in some of these tragedies with that element, but he really starts to go whole hog with that sense of folk tale, fairy tale, myth in Pericles, and he continues running with that in the plays that follow. Now let's see. What about anybody else who want? Yes, Mary Lou. Yeah.
I have to agree. I enjoyed this the most of any of the others because I was more familiar with the others. I was not familiar with this. I love the production of it. I thought some of the quotes, her face was nothing but curious pleasures. She was a virtuous princess. It for me, it had allusions to the Bible, to Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit.
Yes.
The virginity, the purity, and he was damned if he did and damned if he didn't. And it was given 40 days.
Right.
40 days.
40
Interesting
days.
number. Wow.
And I loved the birthday party because I just had a birthday. But besides that, the comic knighthood of it and her little exclamations, I just thought,
It was cute.
and then there was the phrase that he was not good enough for the second princess because he was I think it said a staggering feces. They didn't know where he was from and his his paternity. I mean, he was just some guy that washed ashore, and the father initially didn't think he was good enough for the second wife. THA.
Yeah. Well, I think that was. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but I think that second king, Simonides, he was trying to be rather cagey with Pericles and make believe that he didn't think he was good enough for his daughter, and to see how he would react. In a sense, he was providing a little test for Pericles, and Pericles passes with flying colors in the end. So this notion of having to pass tests, fulfill certain quests, mighty quests. This is another aspect of this fairy tale, legendary kind of storyline. And you find there are a lot of tests that Pericles has to go through in this story. It's someone compares this play to something like the perils of Pauline. The troubles and perils just sort of keep on coming, whether it's to Pericles or to his daughter Marina. It seems like a lot of obstacles that have to be gotten through before this final victory at the end. This is not something that Shakespeare really trafficked in much before Pericles. Anybody else who wanted to weigh in on this? So yes, Betty, yes.
when I first started,
I thought it was like going to be like the opera Pericles, where the where the hero has to answer 3 questions. That's what I thought in the beginning, and of course it didn't go that way. And the other thing, the question I have is, when this was originally done, was it done in Greek costume? Because this was a different era that they produced this in.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's so hard to say because we have so little records of performance practice in Shakespeare in terms of theater in Shakespeare's time. A lot of the costumes that they probably used at that time were the costumes of the present day, of the late 1500s, early 1600s. I would say for the most part, they probably did the majority of their productions in modern dress, but they certainly could have tried to do productions that used what they thought were the costumes of another age. If something was supposed to be taking place in, say, ancient Rome or ancient Greece, they certainly could have tried to replicate that. But I don't know how much of the research they had in terms of what costumes they wore at that time. So I'm not sure how accurate they would have been, but I'm sure they certainly might have tried to do that, to the best of their ability. I would say that generally speaking, in today's theater, we try to be a little more cognizant about historical costuming than they were back then. As to your other point, yes, your comment about the tale of Turandot is very, I think, very well taken, because I certainly thought about that test that Turandot gave for all the suitors that wanted her hand in that story. That's, I think, a very familiar trope in the realm of folk stories. That definitely is another story that makes use of that motif. Very, very true. It's interesting. I think we are discovering that this is a different kind of Shakespeare that appears in this play. Bloom thinks that this is one of Shakespeare's most experimental plays. Actually, it's him really working in a different mode. So there's that. It's the notion that he could work in such a radically different style definitely might have made the editors think that maybe this is not, something does not deserve to be in the official body of work of Shakespeare. Another reason why it might have been included is the fact that many people believe that Shakespeare did not write this play alone, that he wrote it in collaboration. And I don't think we often think about Shakespeare as a writer who worked with other writers. But I would say that probably the majority of plays that were written in Shakespeare's time were written as either partnerships with 2 writers or even a whole committee of writers, because by golly, people had to get plays on the boards really quick because there was a big turnover. People could not just have huge long runs of plays in England at that time like we have now, because there wasn't enough audience for the repeat business. They had to get plays on the boards really quickly, and they had to learn plays really quickly so that they could keep having new material for people to come back to the theaters for. So oftentimes you might have 3, 4, 5 writers on a project, so you could get it done really quick and get it into rehearsal post haste. So some people think that Shakespeare may have had a partner in this particular case. He worked with people earlier in his career. Supposedly he may have had a collaborator on the play Titus Andronicus, and possibly one of his Henry VI plays. Possibly he may have had some assistance with as well. And I think I might have mentioned when we spoke about Timon of Athens that many people think that a playwright named Thomas Middleton may have been a collaborator with Shakespeare on that play, just judging by the stylistic differences from one scene to another. And finally, in the latter part of Shakespeare's career, he also did a good deal of collaboration, first with this play, and then with, I think, probably the latter couple plays of his career, namely Henry VIII and Two Noble Kinsmen, both of which I think he acknowledged to write in collaboration with a playwright named John Fletcher. And there's even a lost play called Cardenio that many people believe he wrote with Fletcher as well. So the well-known plays we believe were written solely by Shakespeare, but there are those pieces that I just mentioned that he did do in collaboration, and we believe that he did it in collaboration, in this case, Pericles, with a playwright and writer named George Wilkins. Now, George Wilkins, people like Harold Bloom simply called a talentless hack. Not a great writer by any stretch of the imagination. And yet, some scholars believe that it may have been initially George Wilkins's idea to do a dramatization of this piece, Pericles, Prince of Tyre. So this is what it has to say about George Wilkins in Wikipedia, and they don't even have complete dates. It simply says that George Wilkins died in 1618. So it says that he was an English dramatist and pamphleteer, best known for his probable collaboration with William Shakespeare on the play Pericles, Prince of Tyre. By profession, he was an innkeeper, but he was also apparently involved in criminal activities. So, there's a common term used for someone who has additional sources of income, and this is just something I found out this year. People call this having another stream of income. They call that a side hustle. And I think George Wilkins had a couple side hustles. And so I don't know whether you'd call the writing a main occupation or a side hustle or vice versa. But it says about his life, Wilkins was an innkeeper in Cow Cross, London, an area that was, quote, notorious as a haunt of whores and thieves. And most information about him derives from his regular appearance in criminal court records for thievery and acts of violence. Many of the charges against him involve violence against women, boo hiss, including kicking a pregnant woman in the belly and knocking down and stomping another woman. Not good, George. The latter appears in other records as a known bawd or keeper of prostitutes. These facts have led to the suggestion that Wilkins's inn functioned as a brothel and that Wilkins was a procurer or pimp. And people who are idolatrous about Shakespeare wonder, well, how could Shakespeare possibly collaborate with someone who was a pimp, an abuser of women, maybe even involved in theft? This is kind of uneasy, makes people uneasy. But he also happened to be a pretty, was a writer of some talent. For example, he wrote a play that was put on by Shakespeare's acting troupe, the King's Men. The play was called The Miseries of enforced marriage. And this was a very well-received play. So one could well understand that if Wilkins had this one piece that was that played well for the audience at the Globe Theater, that it wouldn't be beyond the possibility of him doing a second piece for them. So scholars believe that Wilkins may have had this idea to do this play, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and that perhaps that Shakespeare, being one of the shareholders in the Globe Theater, that he said, well, I could help out with this play to get it on in a quick, efficient way. So the thought is, the way this piece might have come about is that Wilkins perhaps provided an outline for the plot of the piece and possibly wrote the first two acts of the play. And then, because there was a very decisive stylistic shift in the piece, that perhaps Shakespeare took over the main writing of the last, what we would call the last three acts of the play. And that certainly sounds plausible, Now, another thing that makes this play very different from most of Shakespeare's other plays, maybe excepting Henry V, is that this play has a narrator figure in the play, a person who keeps coming back at certain key points in the play, and he starts giving narration, setting the scene for the next section of the piece. So there is this character in Henry V called Chorus, who introduces the play and makes various little reappearances throughout the piece. And that was an interesting kind of experiment for Shakespeare in that history play. Well, in this play that takes place in so many different places, so many different locations over such a long span of time, I think that Wilkins, or Shakespeare maybe, felt that perhaps the theater goers needed a narrator figure to provide the continuity of this big picaresque story. Thus this character of John Gower, who is the main kind of master of ceremonies in the play. Let's see, Jim, I see your hand.
Yeah, you mentioned the innkeeper being instrumental in writing the first two acts, but why wouldn't he have been instrumental primarily in writing the brothel scene?
That's right. Well, that again, this is all supposition. This is all people studying style and all that kind of thing. Yeah, one would think that he would have a special insight into that life. So who knows? Maybe he did. Maybe they collaborated on the dialogue for that scene. We will never know. This is all very much literary speculation. There's something about that scene, about the bawds and the pimps in that scene, that has a very different feeling than the rest of the play. I mean, a lot of the rest of the play seems to exist on this kind of dreamlike, mythic level, and this part has this very naturalistic, very realistic, very nitty-gritty, streetwise kind of feeling, and it doesn't seem to jibe with the style in the rest of the piece. Actually, as long as you mention it, let me just read a little from this section, because some of this stuff just it strikes me more like the style of some of the low-life characters in the Beggar's Opera by John Gay in the early 18th century. It just seems to have that kind of feeling of someone who really knows the neighborhood around Newgate Prison and some of the other unrespectful parts of London. This really seems to have that kind of very colorful feeling. So the pimp, the pander, says to his servant Bolt, "Search the market narrowly. Mitylene is full of gallants. We lost too much money this mart by being too wenchless. Boy, it sounds like a character in Threepenny Opera. And then the bawd, the main madam of the scene, says, we were never so much out of creatures. We have but poor three, and they can do no more than they can do. And they with continual action are even as good as rotten. This does not sound like Shakespeare. And the pimp says, therefore, let's have fresh ones, whatever we pay for them. And if there be not a conscience to be used in every trade, we shall never prosper. And the bawd says, thou sayest true. 'Tis not our bringing up of poor bastards, as I think I have brought up some 11. And the servant Bolt says, aye, to 11, and brought them down again. But shall I search the market? And the bawd says, what else, man? The stuff we have, a strong wind will blow it to pieces. They are so pitifully sodden. And the pimp says, thou sayest true. They're too unwholesome of conscience. The poor Transylvanian is dead that lay with the little baggage. And the servant says, aye, she quickly pooped him. She made him roast meat for worms, but I'll search the market. Oh boy, this is bawdy stuff, you know. This is Shakespeare R-rated, I'd say. Yeah, this was you could see there's a pretty freewheeling street life on the streets of London in Shakespeare's time, and he's really portraying it pretty. And if he's not portraying it, then Wilkins, with his own experiences, portraying it with a very realistic eye and ear. So I would say if Shakespeare wrote it, he definitely consulted with Wilkins to provide the accuracy of the writing, let us say. So I think that's probably a pretty good theory in any case. So anyway, George Wilkins may well be, this collaborator in this piece, and we don't really know about his. But one of the reasons why we believe that Wilkins may have been involved in this is that he actually had a novel, had a piece of fiction published that we would say is based on this play. And the novel is called The Painful Adventures of Pericles, Prince of Tyre. This is a real novel. And if you take a look at the cover of the original publication, and this was published in 1608. This is published a year before this first quarto edition of the play, actually. So some people wonder if the play is based on the novel, but if you take a look at the title page of the novel, it says "The Painful Adventures of Pericles, Prince of Tyre," and then subtitle, "Being the true history of the play of Pericles, as it was lately presented by the worthy and ancient poet John Gower." So not by the playwright William Shakespeare, but by the worthy and ancient poet John Gower. So he's referring to this narrator figure in the play, John Gower. So John Gower was a real poet. John Gower was a real poet about the same generation as Geoffrey Chaucer. And I don't think he has a great reputation today. There are critics, even in the 18th century, writing about John Gower, who said that he was basically a big bore that compared with Chaucer. There are a lot of really uninteresting poetic passages in Gower's work. But what's interesting is that Gower, the poet, the real poet, actually is one of the earliest English writers to write about this character. But he doesn't call it Pericles. He doesn't call this character Pericles. He calls the character Apollonius. And you wonder why did they change the name from Apollonius to Pericles? That's a really good question. But this is really the folktale that this play hangs on. Apollonius of Tyre. And so there is this poem that John Gower wrote probably in the 14th century, It's a long poem called Confessio Amantis, or Confessions of Love, I guess we call it, or Romantic Confessions. So these were a set of maybe 7 or 8 great romances, great medieval romances that he puts in this collection. And among these stories that Gower put in this collection, Confessio Amantis, is Apollonius of Tyre. Now, I found a book that has this little narrative, 5 ancient English narratives, and it has this story. And I'd like to maybe just give you a sense of Gower's style. It's really difficult to read this kind of Middle English, but let me just give you a few verses where you can maybe get a sense of where stylistically he is coming from. So the hero of our play, or of this poem, is this character Apollonius. Let me just read a little of this first part of this telling. So he writes, of a chronic in days gone, the which is clept or called Pantheon. In love's cause I read thus, how that the great Antiochus, of whom that Antioch took his first name, as saith the book, was coupled to a noble queen, and had a daughter him between. But such fortune came to hand that death, which no king may withstand, but every life it must obey, this worthy queen took away. So it's sort of done in rhyming couplets. The king, which much made much moan, though stood as who saith all him won, without which, but nonetheless his daughter, which was Pericles of beauty, dwelt about him still. And when a man hath wealth at will, the flesh is frail and falleth oft, and that this maid tender and soft, which in her father's chambers dwelt, within a time wist and felt for liking and concupiscence, without insight of conscience, the father so with lusts blent, that he cast at his whole intent his own daughter for to spill. This king hath Lizer at his will with strength, and when he time saw, this young maiden he forelay, and she was tender and full of dread, she could not her maidenhead defend, and thus she hath forlorn that flower which she hath long borne. And I'll just stop there. So this theme of incest in this relationship between Antiochus and his daughter is rooted, is mentioned right at the top of this poem by John Gower, even before we have our hero Apollonius make his appearance. So that's baked right into that medieval poem by John Gower. Now, I think that Shakespeare and maybe Tom Wilkins wanted to have a little of that medieval flavor in this play. He wanted to give it that kind of sense of authenticity of an ancient tale. So in the play, when it first starts out, it starts out with this poet, John Gower, at the top of the play, telling in rhyming couplets the context of where this story is coming from. So let's hear a little of Gower at the beginning of Pericles. This is from a modern edition put out by Oxford, so they may have modernized some of the words. But I think that the general poetic form of the piece is intended to mimic these couplets of the poet John Gower, to give it that same feeling. And by the way, it's this same poetic meter, what we call a trochaic tetrameter. no, it's actually iambic tetrameter. Ta-da, 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 ta-da. But it's basically a 4-foot line, 4-beat line. And this is in contrast with Shakespeare's usual 5-foot line, pentameter. So the narration generally has a different feeling than the rest of the play. Let's hear a little of Gower at the top of Pericles, Prince of Tyre. And the Gower says, to sing a song that old was sung, from ashes ancient Gower is come, assuming man's infirmities to gladden your ear and please your eyes. It hath been sung at festivals, on ember eves and holy ales, and lords and ladies in their lives have read it for restoratives. The purchase is to make men glorious, et bonum quo antiquius emelius. If you, born in these latter times, when wits more ripe, accept my rhymes, and that to hear an old man sing may to your wishes pleasure bring, I life would wish, and that I might waste it for you like taper light. This Antioch then, Antiochus the Great, built up this city for his chiefest seat, the fairest in all Syria. I tell you what mine authors say. This king unto him took a fear who died and left a female heir, so buxom, blithe, and full of face, as heaven hath lent her all his grace, with whom the father liking took, and her to incest did provoke. Bad child, worst father, to entice his own, to evil should be done by none. By custom what they did begin was with long use accounted no sin. The beauty of this sinful dame made many princes thither frame to seek her as a bedfellow, in marriage pleasure's playfellow, which to prevent he made a law to keep her still and men in awe, that whoso asked her for his wife, his riddle told not, lost his life. So for her many a wight did die. And then there's the stage direction. The heads of former suitors are revealed, as yon grim looks do testify. What now ensues to the judgment of your eye, I give my cause who best can justify. And then the first scene begins with King Antiochus and Pericles, who is making his bold attempt to answer the riddle. Now, if you've seen this production at Stratford, you will recognize that this does not open with a character named John Gower doing the recitation. It opens instead with whom?
The women.
Yes, it opens with a stage full of either nuns or acolytes to the goddess Diana. Diana is sort of a goddess of female empowerment and chastity and virtue. It's these holy women who seem to be offering the narrative, introduction to the story, and it's not just narrative; it's song as well. So in this production, they make this a wonderful musical moment, and it gives it this feeling of great religious ritual, making us feel that this again, it's not just a naturalistic story, but it's this telling of the play is a kind of ritual, a theatrical ritual. Maybe in a strange sense, it's kind of a liturgical drama, not a Christian drama, but some kind of pagan-like religious reenactment. Maybe a lesson, a moralistic lesson about what it means to be virtuous, what it means to be pure, what it means in contradistinction to the tremendously immoral, impure characters that we see at the top of the play. So what I think I'd like to see if I can turn on my computer, my desktop, and play this opening of this Stratford production. And we can hear this opening musical moment together. Let me just open this up here. Just a moment. Hold on. Into this room. Yes, there we go. Alrighty. So let me get some sound here, and let's see if we can all listen to this. Maybe if you put yourself on mute, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this pretty clearly. And we'll go into the first scene. We'll hear the king, Antiochus, and we'll hear Pericles, and we'll hear a little bit of the daughter. And what's interesting is that during this scene, where normally the riddle would be intoned, would be read by Pericles himself in a typical performance, here the riddle is made a musical moment. So this is the riddle that Pericles reads, that he has to solve. I am no viper, yet I feed on mother's flesh, which did me breed. I sought a husband in which labor, I found that kindness in a father. He's father, son, and husband mild. I, mother, wife, and yet his child. How they may be, and yet in two, as you will live, resolve it, you. You know, I've read critics who say, boy, all those other suitors must have been real dullards not to be able to solve this riddle. It seems pretty darn clear that something is a little fishy in this king-daughter relationship, but it's left to Pericles to be put on the hot seat to have to either solve the riddle or not. And he realizes that it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. I'll be killed whether I solve it or if I don't solve it. So that's Pericles' problem. But I thought it'd be nice to hear this little section, starting with the acolytes of Diana giving their introductory song, and then going into this scene, and then hearing this musical moment in which the king's daughter actually sings this riddle instead of Pericles reading it. Okay, let's let this go. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear okay.
To sing a song that old was sung.
Can you hear okay?
From sacred groves, Diane is come. To sing a song that old was sung, that old was sung. From sacred groves, Diane is come, Diane is come. It hath been sung at festivals, on ember eves, and holy ales, and holy ales. And lords and ladies, while they live, have found it a restorative. To glad your ear with what we sing, and to your wishes pleasure bring. We time would wish, and that we might waste it for you like taper, waste it for you like taper, waste it for you like taper, waste it for you. Diane is come, 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 Diane is come. The great and mighty king, Antiochus, having one only daughter, in the prime and glory of her youth, fell in most unnatural love with her, which to continue to himself, he made this law, that whosoever desired her in marriage and could not unfold the meaning of his riddle for that attempt should lose his life.
Pericles, young Prince of Tyre, you have at large received the danger of the task you undertake.
I have, Antiochus, but with a soul emboldened with the glory of her praise. Think death no hazard in this enterprise.
Bring in our daughter, clothed like a bride, fit for the embracements even of Jove himself. See where she comes. Her face, the book of praises, where is read nothing but curious pleasures.
You gods, that made me man, sway in love, that have inflamed desire in my breast, to taste the fruit of yon celestial tree, or die in the adventures, be my helps.
Pericles,
That would be son to great Antiochus.
before thee stands this fair Hesperides, with golden fruit got dangerous to be touched. Yon sometimes famous princes, like thyself, drawn by report, adventurous by desire, tell thee with speechless tongues and semblance pale, they died here, martyrs slain in Cupid's wars, and with dead cheeks advise thee to desist.
Antiochus, I thank thee, who hath taught my frail mortality to know itself. And by these fearful objects to prepare this body, like to them, to what I must. For death, remembered, should be like a mirror, which tells us life's but breath. To trust it error, thus ready for the way of life or death, I wait the sharpest blow.
Scorning advice, read the conclusion then.
Of all essayed yet, mayest thou prove prosperous. Of all essayed yet, I wish thee happiness. I am no viper, yet I feed on mother's flesh that did me breed. I sought a husband in which labor I found that kindness in a father. He's father, son, and husband mine. I'm mother, wife, and yet his child. How they may be, and yet in truth, as you will live, resolve it, you.
Oh, you powers that give heaven countless eyes to view.
Okay, I'm going to just cut that off now. Anyhow, it really, I think the music helps again to lend this production a very ritualistic kind of feeling, that this is still this kind of religious play, in which there is this sense of the holy in the midst of all this scurrilous immorality somehow. Somehow in this kind of situation, you can deal with all kinds of human, frailty and imperfection if one is doing it as a kind of object lesson as to, how one might be a more virtuous, person, as exemplified by Pericles and his daughter and his wife. I think that was kind of the idea for this production, to make, instead of John Gower the mouthpiece for this story, to make Diana, which is supposed to be this lead singer and storyteller in this first scene, the goddess Diana, and these her acolytes, and these are the sort of controlling narrative figures. And later on in the production, all kinds of characters take their share of narration as well. They truly try to make this narrative portion of the play a real collective enterprise, rather than just making it the burden of one storyteller, which is, I think, an interesting choice. By the way, that lead singer in that piece, the one who starts out the show, the actress's name is Marian Adler. The role of Pericles is played by Evan Bullion. The part of the daughter of the king is Deborah Hay, who is actually triple cast. She's also cast as the person that he eventually marries, the daughter of Simonides, Thaisa. And she also plays their daughter, Marina. So they really put Deborah Hay to work in the production. Anyways, Marian Adler, the person playing Diana, she also is a noted lyricist, and later on there is a song that is first sung by Pericles toward the end of the first half, called "The Pearl," and that song has lyrics by this Marian Adler. She contributed the lyrics to that, and it's a beautiful, beautiful song. And I have a feeling there are some other lyrics based on the Shakespearean text in the play, and I have a feeling she must have had something to do with, polishing some of those words for some of the sung moments in the play as well. Supposedly, this Marian Adler has had, credits off Broadway. Some musical productions of some of her theater projects. So this is a great talent, not just as an actress, but as a writer for the theater as well. Now, as I mentioned, I have this novel that is based on this play. At least most people think that it's based on the play. And I thought it would be interesting to maybe let us dip into the first chapter of this novel of Pericles. Let's see how George Wilkins writes, basing this on the play. So this is his prose style, and it actually makes for pretty decent reading. He may have been a panderer and pimp, but he also could write a rattling good story as well. So here it is, chapter 1. The great and mighty King Antiochus, who was as cruel in tyranny as he was powerful in possessions, seeking more to enrich himself by shows than to renown his name by virtue, caused to be built the goodly city of Antioch in Syria, and called it after his own name, as the chiefest seat of all his dominions, and principal place of his abode. This Antiochus had increase by his queen, one only daughter, so excellent in beauty, as if nature and all perfection had long studied to seem only absolute at her birth. This lady, growing to like ripeness of age, as she had full endowment of outward ornaments, was resorted unto by many youthful princes, who desired her in marriage, offering to make her jointure as noble in possessions as she by beauty was royal in herself, while the king her father, evermore requiring deliberation upon whom rather than other to bestow this his so inestimable a jewel, he began suddenly to have an unlawful concupiscence to grow in himself, which he augmented with an outrageous flame of cruelty sparkling in his heart, and accounted her so worthy in the world that she was too worthy for any but himself. Thus, being rapt with this unnatural love, he sustained such a conflict in his thoughts, wherein madness put modesty to flight, giving over his affections to the unlawfulness of his will, rather than subdued them with the remembrance of the evil he had then put in practice. So that not long after coming into his daughter's chamber and commanding all that were near at her attendance to depart, as if he had some careful and fatherly business, the necessity of whose import desired some private conference with her, he began to make motion of that unjust love to her, which even lust itself, had it not in a father been so raised with impudency, would have blushed but even to have thought upon. Much persuasion, though to little reason, he used, as that he was her father, whom she was bound to obey. He was a king that had power to command. He was in love, and his love was resistless, if resistless, therefore pitiless, either to youth, blood, or beauty. In brief, he was a tyrant who would execute his will. These words, thus uttered with that vehement passion which such sinful lovers fit themselves unto such desires, and such immodest syllables were by him contracted together, that my pen grubs to recite them, and made the school of his daughter's thoughts, wherein were never taught such evils, to wonder at the strangeness, as understanding them not, and at last to demand of her unkingly father what he meant by this, when he, forgetting the fear of heaven, love to his child or reputation among men, though by her withstood with prayers and tears, while the power of weakness could withstand, throwing away all regard of his own honesty, he unloosed the knot of her virginity, and so left this weeping branch to wither by the stalk that brought her forth. So fast came the wet from the sentinels of her ransacked city, that it is improper to say they dropped and rained down tears, but rather that with great floods they poured out water. It is beyond imagination to think whether her eyes had power to receive her sorrow's brine so fast as her heart did send it to them. In brief, they were now no more to be called eyes, for grief's water had blinded them, and for words she had not one to utter, for betwixt her heart's intent and tongue's utterance there lay such a pile of lamentable cogitations that she had no leisure to make up any of them into words, till at the last a nurse that attended her coming in, and finding her face blubbered with tears, which she knew were strange guests to the table of her beauty, first standing in amazed thereat, at last, by the care she had in charge of her, being more enheartened. Dear child and madam, quoth she, why sit you so sorrowfully? Which question, getting way between grief and utterance, Oh, my beloved nurse, answered the lady, even now 2 noble names were lost within the chamber, the name of both a father and a child, the meaning of which secret the nurse understanding not, she entreated her to be more plain, that by knowing the cause of her grief, she might use means to redress it, or else that herself in her own wisdom would allay the violence of that tempest which did wrong to so goodly a building. But she loathed to be the bellows of her own shame, and blushing more to rehearse than her father was to commit, sate sighing and continued silent, until Antiochus, not satisfied with the fruit obtained by his former desire, returned, and like him that by stealth had filched a taste from forth a goodly orchard, is not therewith contented, but either waiteth his opportunity to steal till he be glutted with his stealth, or so adventurous that he is taken to his everlasting shame. So this Antiochus, coming back into the chamber and finding his daughter as full of wet as winter is, commanded the absence of the nurse, which she, accordingly obeying, he began to persuade her that actions past are not to be redeemed, that what's in secret done is no sin, since the concealment excuses it, that evils are not evils if not thought upon, and that himself, her father, had that power to gag all mouths from speaking if it were known. Besides her state, his greatness, his kingdom, her beauty, were ornaments enough to draw the greatest princes to join with her in marriage, and he would further it. So with these and such like persuasions prevailing with his daughter, they long continued in these foul and unjust embracements, till at last the custom of sin made it accounted no sin. And while this wicked father showed the countenance of a loving sire abroad in the eyes of his subjects, notwithstanding at home, he rejoiceth to have played the part of a husband with his own child, with false resemblance of marriage, and to the intent he might always enjoy her, he invented a strange policy to compel away all suitors from desiring her in marriage, by propounding strange questions, the effect and true meaning whereof was thus published in writing. Whoso attempteth and resolveth me of my question shall have my daughter to wife, but whoso attempteth and faileth shall lose his head. Which will of his, when fame had blown abroad, and that by this his law there was found a possibility for obtaining of this lady, such was the singular report of her surpassing beauty, that many princes and men of great nobility, to that purpose repaired thither, who, not being able to explain his riddle propounded, lost their heads, which to the terrifying of others that should attempt the like were placed for open view on the top of his castle gate. So that first chapter provides sort of the setup for scene one of Pericles, the play. You get a lot more backstory in the novel, I think, than you do in the play. I think it starts where things are in media res, in the middle of things, so it sort of takes a minute or two for the audience to get their bearings. But Wilkins kind of starts it out as a traditional novel with kind of sort of setting the scene for this picaresque tale. Sorry for the heavy dose of incest in the chapter one. That was a little bit much, but I guess if you're a sensationalist novel, you got to start with sensation. So I think it's an interesting theory that perhaps in order to get some money, to get a little side hustle from this play, Wilkins decided to make sort of an unauthorized version of this play in novel form that was published in 1608, again, a year before this play was published as a quarto edition. So I think he was hoping to, get the riches from this piece a little before anyone else did. It is worth kind of mentioning in passing that playwrights really did not own their plays in England at this time. The plays were bought by theater companies, by companies of actors, and it's these companies that really owned the plays. And they were loath to give these up to be published, because then other companies would have access to the plays and they would have competition for, say, playing Hamlet or Macbeth or King Lear, say. So they wanted to keep these plays under lock and key for their own use. These quarto publications, these were pirated versions of these plays. Sometimes actors in these companies, sometimes they would be the pirates indeed. If they knew a certain part, they could at least memorize their own part, and then they could sort of take down from memory the parts of everybody else. So this quarto edition of Pericles that we have to work from, this is called perhaps a bad, maybe it's does it an injustice to call it a bad quarto, but it is not really as authentic a script as some of the plays that we have of Shakespeare, but it's a play that was published from what they call reportage, meaning either an actor in the company took down from memory the script of the play, or it was taken down by someone in the audience of a performance taking down dialogue from the play as best as they could. and trying to have it published from their recollections again, writing the play down from the audience's point of view and from their memory. You can understand from publications, pirated publications that were achieved in this way, that there could be a lot of discrepancies from the actual playwright's work. So a lot of people who have to publish editions of Pericles have a lot of problems because, again, it's not a very reliable source, this first quarto edition. So a lot of modern editions like this one from Oxford, a lot of these editions are make use of other sources to supplement either things that are ambiguous in the quarto publication from 1609, or maybe that something that was left out, say lines that were left out that are crucial to understanding the play. So a lot of editors of Pericles, a lot of them make use of this novel by George Wilkins. They try to make use of certain passages that are in the novel that aren't in the play, that help to make sense of what is in the play script. I would say that every modern published edition of Pericles, if you compare them side by side, you're going to find discrepancies in every edition. Every publisher, every editor is going to try to complete this play in a slightly different way. And I would venture to say that every production of Pericles that makes use of this, Shakespearean script, this first quarto edition of the script, they are probably going to have their own performing edition. They're going to make decisions on the kind of text they use in performance. Because the quarto, if you just tried to play it on its own, I don't think would make entire sense to the audience. It simply would have things that would be not completely comprehensible. So I think that that's a very interesting challenge. And so, the director of this production, Scott Wentworth, he made a really wonderful playing edition of this piece. And one of the actors in a talkback, one of the actors in the company said that really Scott Wentworth should copyright his version of this play, because it does, I think, play very well. And it's a much shorter edition than the quarto version of the piece. I got another video out of the play yesterday and was watching it. I think it's close to 3 hours without intermission, that particular video. And this performance came in on like about 2.25 hours. So I think they cut a good 40 minutes out of this script. And so I think made it a little more, playable in terms of practical use. And I think, again, using this musical element, to enrich the fantasy, dreamlike atmosphere of the piece, I think also was to the good in this production. The composer in this Stratford production is a man named Paul Shilton, and I guess you could probably find a biography about him in the house program for the piece that you can find on the Stratford website. And I think his musical contributions really are spectacular and really do help to give a lot of great atmosphere and emotional strength to the piece. Let's see, maybe I could just offer a couple more excerpts from the play before we give more personal reaction to the production. I spoke about how style is a very important thing in terms of how we distinguish Wilkins, say, and Shakespeare. And one of the interesting aspects is that there are a lot of echoes in the play. I mean, there's two kings, there's two daughters of kings, in which Pericles tries to win their hands. there's two storm scenes of ships at sea and ships being wrecked at sea. And so there are monologues or little speeches that Pericles has in those two storm scenes. And it's just interesting to compare his diction in these speeches that he gives while these storms are tearing these ships apart. So here's first in the fifth scene of the play, in the first storm at sea, in which Pericles is railing against the thunder and lightning and rain. So this is his first experience with the storm at sea. And he says, "Yet cease your ire, you angry stars of heaven. Rain, wind, and thunder, remember earthly man is but a substance that must yield to you. And I, as fits my nature, do obey you. Alas, the sea hath cast me on the rocks, washed me from shore to shore, and left my breath nothing to think on but ensuing death. Let it suffice the greatness of your powers to have bereft a prince of all his fortunes, and having thrown him from your watery grave, here to have death in peace is all he'll crave." So you find in this speech, you find some rhyming rhymes at the end of the lines. You find a lot of thoughts that end with the end of a line. Shakespeare, in his late works, he often uses this iambic pentameter to not end the thought at the end of the line, but to continue it to the next line. You find that quite frequent, and so you find more of that, I think, when Shakespeare is doing this speech during the second storm at sea, in which Pericles rails against the elements. Let's hear this one. This is scene 11. "Thou God of this great vast, rebuke these surges which wash both heaven and hell, and thou that hast upon the wind's command, bind them in brass, having called them from the deep. O still thy deafening, dreadful thunders, gently quench thy nimble, sulphurous flashes. O ho, Lycordia, how does my queen? Thou stormest venomously, wilt thou spit all thyself? The seaman's whistle is as a whisper in the ears of death unheard. Lycordia, Lucina, O divine patroness and midwife gentle to those that cry by night, convey thy deity aboard our dancing boat. Make swift the pangs of my queen's travails." To me, the poetry quotient of this second soliloquy at sea is much higher than the first soliloquy. And I think you can tell there is a qualitative difference between Shakespeare in this second monologue and the first, whether it's by Wilkins or by another hand. There definitely are Shakespeare critics who say Shakespeare couldn't have possibly written the first two acts of the play, just not using the kind of diction that we recognize as Shakespeare. But the last three acts definitely have a different aspect. And so when you get a scene like the reconciliation scene in which Pericles recognizes his daughter Marina after being separated from her for about 14 years, and his reactions to these revelations as he begins to get a greater sense of her being his daughter. So just a few little passages that Pericles says during this time, where he says to Marina, I am great with woe, and shall deliver weeping. My dearest wife was like this maid, and such a one my daughter might have been. My queen's square brows, her stature to an inch, are wand-like straight, as silver-voiced, her eyes as jewel-like, and cased as richly in pace another Juno, who starves the ears she feeds and makes them hungry the more she gives them speech. So, I mean, this is very flowery language. And he says, prithee speak, Falseness cannot come from thee, for thou lookest modest as justice, and thou seemest a palace for the crowned truth to dwell in. I will believe thee, and make my senses credit thy relation to points that seem impossible. Thou showest like one I loved indeed. What were thy friends? Didst thou not say when I did push thee back, which was when I perceived thee, that thou camest from good descending? And he goes on like that. This really, I think that this reconciliation or recognition scene, as it's often called, it would not ring quite as powerfully, if it weren't with, these words of Shakespeare. So I think that that's a, pretty good case to be made for if Shakespeare did not write the entire play, then certainly the last 2 or 3 acts certainly have his literary poetic imprint. Well, it's about 2:30 now. Why don't we unmute ourselves, and if people are willing, if you'd like to give your reaction to the production as you saw it, if you have seen it. We've gotten some reactions already, but if you'd be willing to offer any more of your thoughts about the piece, whether you again thought it was more engaging than some of the films you've seen thus far, or some of you less, and if so, why? I'd be interested in your thoughts. So Mary Lou, I know you spoke earlier, but do you have anything you wanted to add about the film you've seen?
Well, I will agree with Linda that it's not a typical Shakespearean work. And also, I did think that the ending was like Cinderella. So it kind of surprised me, to be honest.
Yes, I mean, you don't find those kinds of fairy tale-like happy endings in Shakespeare. They tried to make a fairy tale ending of King Lear. People hated the tragic ending of Shakespeare's original play. They tried to make it a wonderful happy ending with people getting reconciled and married at the end, and Lear getting his kingdom back. And it makes for great theater, but it's not real Shakespeare. But here is Shakespeare himself giving this kind of a wonderful ending to this great tragic comedy, picaresque tale. It's a different tone he has, and for some people it's a very welcome tone, but it's very different from especially the Shakespeare of the great tragedies. Gail, what did you think of this?
Well, I started watching it yesterday, and I have to say I stopped because I thought, like Linda said, it was kind of light, and didn't have the depth, and I it just seemed, and of course the incest was kind of unnerving, but
yes,
but I just now I feel like I will go back and watch it because it has more to it than I thought. But that was my initial reaction, and I just stopped watching it because I just didn't think it was up to par. And of course, since the first scenes now I recognize may have been written by somebody else, it does make more sense to me.
Yeah, maybe when you get into the Shakespeare portions,
right.
it'll start improving. So
right.
give it a bit of a chance.
Yeah.
Ruth, do you have any thoughts about the production?
Yeah, dare I call it a soap opera?
You dare. You dare.
Okay, because that's what I felt about it. I mean, it was so dramatic, and the way he started it out was kind of startling for Shakespeare.
Yes.
The incest part of it, and also the way it ended. He brought everything together very cleverly, I will say.
Thank you.
I mean, it was a satisfactory ending as far as I'm concerned, but because he did a very good job of putting them in the position that they were in, and then they got to be all alive and be a family again. So what's wrong with that?
That's right.
And then the other thing, we're used to reading Shakespeare's plays and gaining what we call pearls of wisdom. Like you pointed out before, that the play we talked about before had so many quotes in it that we've come down through the ages. I didn't really find that much in this particular play that stood up to that kind of.
Okay, yeah, not as quotable, yeah. So,
no, right.
So we find different values in this piece than we do in others. And again, that's one of the maybe one of the reasons why it wasn't included in the first folio. It's definitely Shakespeare in a different key. Let's see, Marie, do you have any thoughts on the piece? Have you seen the film? Oh, you need to unmute yourself. Press the mute button if you can.
Tell her it looks like
Still can't. Can you touch the mute button? There you go.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was different. It was a fantasy.
Okay.
No quotables, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's
was
I mean,
Very
you
different.
go to one of these folk tale like plays or romances
Yes.
with different expectations. You know, it brings different kinds of narrative strategies in than you would find, say, in a pure, Shakespeare comedy or tragedy. And because it's this mix of different modes, it makes some playgoers uneasy. They don't know how to deal with those rapid changes of style, and it for some it's a bumpy ride. But if you take it for what it is, I think it does have its entertaining value. Linda, anything more you wanted to say about it?
No, not too much. I really didn't understand why the incest part was even included in it, except when you explained that maybe it was for commercial reasons. I mean, to get people into watching it or whatever. But it was kind of sleazy, and I didn't even know why it was there because it didn't go on through the rest of the play. And
Well,
it didn't have any relevance.
It's part of this medieval tale of Apollonius of Tyre. It's in all these different versions. So I don't think you can I don't think you can get rid of the. I don't think you can get rid of the incest aspect of the piece any more than you can get rid of it in Oedipus Rex.
Oh no, but I disagree on that. But I think I just couldn't understand what the need was to even bring Antiochus into it because he featured so little in the rest of the play.
Yeah, because he died. Well, I think it's because they needed to have some motivation to get Pericles to be going on all these trips all over the ancient world, and his fear that he would be hunted by the underlings of Antiochus, who would try to get him to be killed because of his fatal knowledge. He wanted to avoid that. Pericles is a little bit, he's not the most at times courageous person, and he does try to run away from this danger. And at some point, he actually tries to save his own land of Tyre by not being in the country because he fears that if he's there, his entire population might be considered the enemy of Antioch. So I think they use this terrible deed of the king of Antioch to give Pericles the motive power to go to all these different places in the play. Yeah, Jim?
Yeah, I think there's another reason, and I think the incest scene may be in there to contrast it from what happens to Pericles' daughter and the brothel scene. And the brothel scene is very powerful because whereas in the incest scene, she did not stand up to her father, here in the brothel scene, this who everyone thought was just a common woman, and they were, sort of treated generally like second-class citizens in their day, and she was essentially a slave in there, and yet she stood up to two powerful men in that scene, and that very much is a contrast.
Yes, that there are these mirror scenes in the play. So contrasting Antiochus and his daughter, the daughter's figure, and Marina in the brothel. It's a very different kind of story. Very different kind of way those characters comport themselves. So yes, there is this sort of like compare and contrast sort of thing going on. in a number of these scenes. You can look at Pericles and some of these other pieces as kind of related to the old medieval morality plays, I'd say. And of course, you have people who represent vice and other key virtues and such. You find some of that in this play. These characters represent more archetypes than real individuals, I'd say, and many of them are effective in that way. Let's see, Karen, you're unmuted. Do you have any thoughts about the play if you've seen the film?
Well, interestingly, it was the scene in the brothel where Marina defends her virtue. I really want to go back and read her speech because I found it to be quite moving, actually. One that would fit in the Me Too movement. She effectively changes the heart of the person who's about to have her for money, and gets him to see her in a very different light. And I thought that was quite moving, and I was surprised at that point in the play to be so moved, by it. It was an easy watch, it didn't tax the brain too much. It was fun to watch. It was fun in these times to have a happy ever after ending.
Yes, definitely.
And so it was a good watch for this.
Yeah. They've programmed enough tragedies in this film series. We needed a little something that ended a little more cheerier. I just wanted to mention that supposedly this scene in the brothel between Marina and that governor character, that's one of the scenes that is most problematic and patchy in the Quarto edition. And that's one of the scenes that benefits most from being enriched by content that's in George Wilkinson's novel. And I have a feeling that there were some speeches that were included in this Stratford production that were taken from the novel, and definitely does give greater believability to this contest of wills between these two characters. So I think that that's a really good example of how again, this play really does not exist very well simply from the text that's in the Quarto. You really do need to supplement it with some of these other sources, whether it's in some of these medieval sources or this source by Wilkins. Let's see, maybe one more person. Would anyone else? Betty, did you see the piece? And if so, would you like, let's see, you need to unmute yourself.
Mary Lou is raising her hand.
Oh, okay. I can't see her now. Yes.
I'm putting in a plug for PBS, which will continue tonight at 9 p.m. for the suffrage vote, because after watching that and then watching the initial acts of this play, the sexism was so upsetting.
Okay, yes. One needs a little corrective after that. Yes, I'd say so. But at least this production tried to give more of the feminine voice through having the acolytes of Diana being the narrative figures in the piece. So I think that does help somewhat. And if you read the director's note in the house program, he does make reference to the fact that Shakespeare is trying to deal fairly honestly and forthrightly with the sex trade and people being being marketed and people being lives being stolen away by the sex trade. He says that we need to look at those scenes for what they are, a true cautionary tale. They don't pretty it up very much in this play, and to see this very virtuous person trying to stand up for herself in the piece is a very startling thing. In any case, it's coming up on about 2:45, and I guess we probably need to be winding things up. Next week, we'll be going back to the tragic mode And it's kind of another picturesque kind of play, Antony and Cleopatra. I mean, it takes place partly in Egypt, partly in Rome, and the scenes kind of shuttle very freely between those two locations. So again, it's Shakespeare working on this kind of epic scale in terms of taking place all over the ancient world. But again, this is more, you know, in the Shakespeare's more straight ahead, tragic, historical mode. So not a great happy ending, I can promise you, but I think you'll find some of Shakespeare's most memorable language in it. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts about how Stratford treats that great historical tragedy when we meet next week, same time, same place. So thanks again for your attention.
Thank you,
And
Michael.
look forward to our meeting again next week. So thank you again, and we'll see you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Phil Bryson, we had a book. by
Yes,
him.
there's